can't imagine how many times you disappointed yourself. Not in death, but in the prime of youth. Not during great betrayals, but in silent, invisible moments. Every time you sought pleasure rather than meaning. Every time you emptied yourself, not out of love, but out of habit. You called it sex. And you laughed. She was told that pleasure was a reward. She was told that orgasm was her destiny, and they weren't wrong. But they weren't told the whole truth either. Yes, there is something divine in the moment of surrender, something sacred in the heartbeat of liberation when it is shared with love, with presence in the union of souls. Orgasm can be a gateway, a mystical fusion with oneness, an explosion of light where the mind fades and the body sings. Orgasm is not simply a neurochemical discharge or a physical spasm. In the hidden dimensions of human experience, it is a profound rupture, an energetic event where the subtle body momentarily separates from its physical form, exposing the soul to forces that transcend the material world. This rupture is known in ancient esoteric traditions as the celestial fissure. After its climax, the soul can ascend, shatter, or subtly penetrate dimensions beyond our comprehension. Many ancient spiritual traditions revered orgasm with a twofold fervor, viewing it as both a sacred gateway and a potential trap. Sufi mystics called it the narrow bridge between the self and the absolute, while Vikrists perceived it as a moment when the veil thins, an opening through which the divine can enter or exit, depending on each individual's level of consciousness. All these ancient traditions recognized that energy doesn't simply disappear when released. It goes somewhere. And unless we are trained in inner guidance, spiritual protection, or energy flow, this energy doesn't return to us. On the contrary, it can dissipate, leaving behind only a fragment of our soul's cohesion at each peak. In esoteric psychology, this is referred to as dissociation. In spiritual science, however, it is a destruction of essence, a dangerous act if repeated unconsciously. With each orgasm, the etheric field briefly dissolves. Without conscious recollection, sealing and spiritual encapsulation, a trace of the soul can disappear. This liberation of the soul is not always negative. In conscious practices like sacred tantra, this same liberation can be used to reach higher planes of existence, to connect with divine beings, or to transform lower behavioral patterns into enlightenment. However, when orgasm occurs unconsciously, out of habit or without full awareness, it is comparable to a balloon detaching from its tether. Energy dissipates chaotically, and in doing so, a part of the individual's essential coherence is lost. To fully grasp the phenomenon of soul loss, it is therefore necessary to return to the original anatomy of being and to conceive of orgasm not only as a pleasurable event, but also as a sacred and simultaneously explosive point of transition. This is not a moral issue. This is not about guilt or purity, but about energetic integrity. And when we understand and respect the different levels of being, we begin to realize that every culminating moment is a death or a rebirth. Depending on our consciousness, each person is surrounded by several energetic layers, commonly called the aura. The Orion field acts as a buffer and a membrane, protecting the integrity of the inner self from external forces and dimensional disturbances. This Orion layer is not static. It fluctuates, expanding and contracting according to emotional state, spiritual practices, physical health, and especially sexual arousal and ejaculation. During orgasm, the aura field undergoes a sudden and intense expansion, comparable to near-death experiences, childbirth, or moments of profound mystical union. This expansion is accompanied by a temporary thinning of the aura membrane, particularly at the solar plexus, the sacral chakra, and the base of the skull points, traditionally considered portals between dimensions. In esoteric teachings, orgasm is perceived as an explosion of prana, the life force energy, emanating from the root chakra. In conscious spiritual practice, this energy is guided vertically through the Sushumna Nadi, the central energy channel that runs along the spine, and redirected to the crown chakra. If this vertical ascent is properly mastered, it opens the third eye and the thousand-petaled lotus, thus creating a bridge to higher levels of consciousness. In an uninformed or unconscious person, this energy does not rise. On the contrary, it discharges horizontally outward, destabilizing the etheric shield and causing a rupture in the etheric network, the filamentous structure that connects the physical body to the soul. Taoists called this external explosion Jinglos, and what Gnostics described it as the unfurling of the cloak of light. One of the lesser-known but essential elements of this process is the golden thread. Also called Antakarana in Kabbalah and Yoga, it is a luminous bridge connecting the individual soul to the higher self. During orgasm, this thread vibrates. If the energy is unbalanced, it can become taut. And although it doesn't break except at death, it can loosen, weakening the soul's anchoring and opening subtle fissures through which energy, and sometimes even spiritual coherence, can escape. What is released during orgasm is not mere energy. It is a kind of essence, the refined residue of soul consciousness, sometimes called kriso in Gnostic writings and chas in Ayurvedic medicine. This substance is associated with divine memory, spiritual clarity and inner guidance. Once lost, it is difficult to recover. Repeated losses can eventually lead to spiritual confusion, emotional dissociation, or a persistent feeling of emptiness. The astral body, responsible for dreams, emotions, and memories, is particularly vulnerable during orgasm. This occurs because this layer is most likely to conflict with the physical body when the orbicular field expands. Many initiates report strange dreams, hallucinations, or unusual emotional effects after intense sexual experiences, especially if the act lacked spiritual grounding or was characterized by mutual respect. These are not psychological symptoms. They are echoes of astral displacement, signs that a part of the soul has moved away from the body. The danger is even greater if the astral field is disturbed and the soul partially detaches, as this allows the penetration of external entities, non-physical beings from the lower astral plane. The Gnostics called these beings archons, Taoists called them hungry ghosts, and indigenous shamans often describe them as blind spirits. They are drawn to the life energy released during unconscious orgasm. When the auric boundary opens, they can attach themselves to the weakened energy field and, over time, feed on the individual's essence. This is not a legend. This is a known risk for initiates who participate in intensive practices without spiritual hygiene. Added to this is the phenomenon of energetic imprinting, where a part of the soul remains subtly linked to the person or place of orgasm. This is one of the reasons why some people have great difficulty forgetting certain partners or are haunted by past sexual encounters. When a soul enters another person's energy field, it leaves a trace of its resonance. Unless this trace is retrieved or transformed, it can act as an anchor, directing the person's attention, dreams, and emotional energy toward that individual for years. All of this highlights a crucial truth. Orgasm is not neutral. Depending on the participant's level of consciousness, this can be either a portal or a trap. The celestial rift that appears at the culminating point invites either the soul's ascension or the fragmentation of the self. One of the first and least understood signs of soul loss is a subtle alteration of inner vision. This is not blindness in the literal sense, but rather a weakening of inner perception. People who previously possessed a vivid imagination, a good dream memory, or intense visions often experience a strange apathy after a series of intense sexual encounters. The colors of their dreams fade. Meditation becomes more difficult. Their inner images seem inert and mechanical. This is not simply exhaustion, but the result of a loss of cohesion in the astral body. Because the astral body projects images into consciousness, the mind becomes empty or confused as it begins to dissolve. Those who experience this often say, "I feel as if my imagination has died," or that I see nothing when I close my eyes. It is not the imagination itself that dies, but the soul's capacity for projection. Of all dream archetypes, one of the most subtle signs of soul loss is the recurring dream of falling, especially when it ends without impact or resolution. Those who experience it often describe a sensation of being pulled down or up through tunnels in the sky or through space without ever touching the ground. When the soul is whole and has found its place in the body, the inner voice, that silent guide we often call intuition or the higher self, speaks with clarity and distinction. But after repeated soul losses, disturbances in this voice are perceived. Sometimes it falls silent completely. Sometimes it breaks. Those affected hear conflicting, impulses or feel as though this voice no longer belongs to them. Another benefit of this discipline is improved concentration and willpower. Psychologically, self-control restructures the limbic system, the primitive part of the brain responsible for impulse control, and strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the seat of decision-making and higher cognitive functions. Hormonally, testosterone levels tend to normalize. Scientific studies, some hidden in obscure Soviet-era medical journals, others discreetly circulated within Eastern monastic orders, suggest that regular urethral constriction leads to increased testosterone levels, hormonal balance, and heightened vitality. On an emotional level, those who practice this sacred art experience a unique sense of freedom. Desires no longer dictate their behavior. They are no longer manipulated like puppets by the media, advertising, and cultural conditioning. They see beyond the illusion of gratification and begin to experience joy not in immediate satisfaction, but in the present moment. Many wonder, but is it healthy to cling to this for so long? Doesn't it create tension? While this approach holds the key to strength, clarity, and transformation, if misunderstood or practiced recklessly, it can also become a trap, a burden, or even a spiritual blockage. This chapter is not intended to discourage, but to protect. For every man who has succeeded in practicing semen retention, another has failed due to a lack of understanding of its drawbacks. One of the most frequent, though often overlooked, consequences of semen retention is psychological tension and energy blockage. If a man begins to withhold his semen without understanding the principles of energy transformation, he is likely to suffer from restlessness, irritability, mood swings, or even a form of anxiety paralysis. Semen is not just a bodily fluid, it is energy. And energy, like electricity, must be released or channeled. If the body's energy channels, called nadis by yogis and meridians, by Chinese sages, become blocked, the energy stagnates like steam in an airtight container. Over time, this buildup can manifest as headaches, insomnia, restlessness, or even obsessive thoughts. From a psychological perspective, this manifests as an excessive fixation on the idea of purity. The individual becomes obsessed with counting the days, measuring periods of abstinence, avoiding triggers, and controlling their every thought. What began as a spiritual practice transforms into a mental prison. Libido, when not in harmony with love, becomes a source of shame or anxiety. In my clinical practice, I have encountered many men who develop a profound conflict between their natural sexuality and their desire for spiritual fulfillment. Instead of finding liberation, they sink into self-hatred, religious guilt, or spiritual perfectionism. Another danger, subtle but serious, is an inflated ego. Prolonged sexual abstinence, especially in the early stages of spiritual development, can foster a strong sense of superiority or spiritual pride. A man may then perceive himself as more enlightened, more disciplined, or more virile than others. This is a fatal illusion. The path of abstinence, if not accompanied by humility and a willingness to serve, feeds the ego instead of awakening the higher self. This heightened sense of identity becomes fragile, defensive, and isolating. The man comes to believe himself superior to others, thus destroying the essential bond upon which true spiritual strength rests. From a biological perspective, persistent and inflexible ejaculation can lead to hormonal imbalances and physical stagnation. The male reproductive system is not designed to store seminal fluid indefinitely without cycles of ejaculation and replenishment. While short and medium-term water retention can increase testosterone levels and vitality, prolonged retention, especially without sufficient physical or creative activity, can lead to stagnation or a drop in testosterone levels, decreased libido, and emotional apathy. In this case, the body is signaling that it needs rest, but the mind resists out of fear or pride. This stubbornness can create a divide between body and mind, leading to physical exhaustion, pelvic tension, and a loss of emotional flexibility. Added to this is a spiritual danger that is often misunderstood and which I call ascension deviation. This occurs when a man uses semen retention not as a genuine means of transformation, but as an escape from emotional suffering, trauma, or unresolved wounds. Instead of confronting their pain, anger, loneliness, or fear, they take refuge in discipline, They mistake repression for purification, but the soul is not fooled. The unhealed inner child, the repressed anger, the abandoned shadow, all these forces are unleashed with increasing intensity. As vital energy amplifies, if they are not addressed with honesty and emotional integration, they can trigger sudden emotional crises, sexual nightmares, compulsive relapses, or worse, psychological fragmentation. Feel free to share this video with anyone who might need it and subscribe to the channel until the next video.